Thank you to all our subscribers for the messages. Let's show that our content is authentic. There's a skull in the American Museum of Natural History. Catalogue number AMNH5027. It sits in a glass case in the dinosaur halls, labelled Protoceratops andrewsi. Children walk past it daily. Tourists photograph it. Few pause long enough to read the description. But that skull solved a mystery that had puzzled scholars for 2,500 years. The skull is roughly 2 feet long. It has a prominent beak, curved and powerful, designed for shearing vegetation. It has a large frill extending backward from the head, creating a shield-like structure. The eye sockets are positioned forward, giving binocular vision. The bone structure is thick, heavy, built to withstand impact. And it was found in exactly the location where ancient Greeks said griffins nested. In the gold-bearing deserts of Central Asia, in the Gobi, where Greek historians recorded that strange creatures with eagle heads and lion bodies guarded precious metals. The skull is 75 million years old, but it explained accounts written in 440 BC. This is not the only case. In museums across the world, specimens sit catalogued and preserved that validate myths dismissed as obvious fiction. Bones that match legendary descriptions with disturbing precision. Fossils found in locations specified by ancient texts. Physical evidence proving that what seemed impossible was merely extinct. Before we begin, I need you to understand what this is and what it isn't. This is not cryptozoology. I will not argue that dragons still live in remote caves or that unicorns survive in hidden valleys. This is not an attempt to validate every legend or prove ancient peoples possess supernatural knowledge. This is documented history, paleontology, zoology, archaeology. The scientific investigation demonstrating that 5 creatures universally dismissed as mythological were real animals observed by ancient peoples and described with remarkable accuracy given their limited frameworks for understanding what they witnessed. The connections I present draw on research by leading paleontologists and historians of science, including Dr. Adrian Mayer at Stanford University, whose work has been published by Princeton University Press and cited in Nature, Science, and National Geographic. Where scholarly debate exists, I present the most compelling evidence. Every fossil mentioned has a museum catalogue number. Every ancient text is cited with specific references. Every scientific paper is identified by author, journal, and publication date. This is verifiable research presented in atmospheric narrative style. For each creature, I will present the myth as ancient sources recorded it. Clay tablets, medieval manuscripts, oral traditions preserved through generations. I will show you what they claimed to see, how they described it, the specific details they recorded. Then I will present the scientific discovery, the fossil excavation, the living species identification, the moment when researchers realized that ancient descriptions matched physical evidence with precision that exceeded coincidence. And I will trace the connection as leading scholars have documented it. How specific mythological details correspond to anatomical features. How geographic distribution of legends matches fossil distribution. How behaviors described in texts align with behaviors reconstructed from skeletal evidence or observed in living relatives. What you're about to hear challenges a fundamental assumption, that ancient peoples were primitive, credulous, prone to fantasy. That their myths were pure invention disconnected from observation. That dragons and unicorns and thunderbirds were imaginary creatures created from whole cloth. The evidence reveals otherwise. Ancient peoples were observers. They found fossils. They encountered rare animals. They described what they saw using the vocabulary and conceptual frameworks available to them. When they lacked words for extinct Pleistocene rhinoceros, they said unicorn. When they found dinosaur bones, they said, dragon. They were doing natural history, paleontology before the word existed, zoology before scientific method. Their conclusions were often wrong taxonomically, but their observations were frequently accurate. This matters because it reveals something about human intelligence across time. The ancients were not stupid. They were not superstitious fools easily duped by illusion. They were rational people attempting to make sense of genuine physical evidence using available knowledge. When we dismiss their accounts as pure myth, we lose valuable data. When we examine their descriptions as potential observations filtered through pre-scientific vocabulary, we discover that myth often preserves truth. 5 times, science has vindicated mythology. 5 creatures once considered impossible have been proven real. Not alive today in most cases, but real nonetheless. Physical, observable, leaving bones and fossils and physical evidence that matches mythological descriptions with remarkable fidelity. If you value deep historical investigation, if you want to see how mythology intersects with paleontology, if you're willing to consider that ancient texts might contain more observation than imagination, then subscribe now. Click that notification bell, because we venture regularly into territories where comfortable categories collapse, where myth becomes science, where the impossible becomes merely extinct. And leave a comment answering this. Which of these 5 creatures surprises you most? The dragon whose bones were found exactly where medieval texts said they would be. The unicorn whose fossilized skull was discovered in Siberian caves with a single massive horn socket. The thunderbird whose wingspan matched Native American descriptions within measurement error. Tell me which one you want to hear about first. I am Mr. Ravenhurst, and tonight we examine 5 creatures that were real, that existed, that left physical evidence, that ancient peoples observed and described, that we dismissed as fantasy until science proved us wrong. We begin not with fire-breathing or magic or supernatural power, but with bones, real bones, catalogued in museums, measured by paleontologists, dated through radiometric analysis, proven real by methods that cannot be disputed. We begin with the creature that appears in more cultures than any other, that was described on 5 continents by peoples who never met, that left fossils on every landmass. That ancient observers got remarkably right despite lacking any concept of extinction or deep time. We begin with dragons. Chapter 1. Dragons, the global consensus. Here's what should disturb you about dragons. They appear everywhere. Mesopotamian cylinder seals from 3000 BC show serpentine creatures with legs. Chinese oracle bones from 1200 BC record encounters with long. Greek pottery from 800 BC depicts reptilian monsters. Norse sagas written in 1200 AD describe Jörmungandr. Mesoamerican codices show Quetzalcoatl. Aboriginal Australian Dreamtime stories describe rainbow serpents. Hindu texts mention Vritra. Persian legends speak of Ajidahaka. Different continents, different millennia, different languages, different religions, different cosmologies. No contact documented between these cultures during the periods when these myths originated, yet all describe fundamentally similar creatures. Reptilian. Large to enormous, often 4-legged, elongated body, dangerous, associated with elemental forces, sometimes with elaborate head structures, sometimes with wings or the ability to fly, sometimes associated with water, sometimes with fire, but always reptilian, always large, always significant. This consistency demands explanation. Either every culture independently invented the same imaginary creature, which seems statistically unlikely given the specific shared details, or there was global cultural transmission of the dragon concept before recorded history, for which no archaeological evidence exists, or all these cultures were observing something real, and describing it within their available frameworks. The third option was dismissed by science for centuries. Dragons couldn't exist. The physics of flight at that scale are impossible for biological organisms. Fire breathing violates thermodynamics and biological possibility. The whole concept is nonsense from an evolutionary and physical perspective. Except they weren't describing one thing. They were describing two things found everywhere humans lived. And when you combine those two things, when you overlay fossil evidence with observations of living reptiles, you get dragons. First component, dinosaur fossils. Dinosaur fossils appear in surface deposits worldwide. This is not occasional. This is constant. Erosion exposes them continually. Rivers cut through sedimentary layers, revealing bone beds. Cliff faces weather and crumble, dropping vertebrae onto beaches. Desert winds scour away sand, exposing skulls that have been buried for millions of years. Construction projects unearth massive bones. Agricultural ploughing turns up fossilized teeth. Ancient peoples found them constantly. They didn't know what they were, but they knew they were bones. Enormous bones. Skulls with massive jaws and eye sockets the size of human heads. Teeth designed for tearing flesh, some curved like scimitars, some serrated like steak knives, all impossibly large. Vertebrae from creatures far longer than any living animal. Ribs that could cage an elephant. Limb bones thicker than tree trunks. Claws like daggers, all turned to stone. All impossibly large. The Chinese were explicit about this. They called fossils longu, dragon bones. Not metaphorically, not as poetic language. They believed these were literal dragon remains, and they collected them systematically, for centuries, for millennia. They mapped collection sites. They knew which cliffs and caves and riverbeds produced the best specimens. They transported them to cities. They ground them into powder for traditional medicine. They sold them in apothecary shops. They exported them along trade routes. This wasn't superstition. This was systematic natural resource extraction based on consistent physical evidence. The bones were real. The bones were everywhere. The bones demanded explanation. When Western paleontologists reached China in the 1890s, they discovered that Chinese apothecaries had enormous fossil collections. Not scattered specimens, not random curiosities, systematic collections. Thousands of specimens, tons of fossilized bone. The locals knew exactly where to find them. They'd been harvesting them for generations, for centuries, for over 1,000 years of documented collection. The paleontologists realized something extraordinary. The Chinese had been doing paleontology before the West had a word for it. They'd been systematically collecting, cataloging in their way, and utilizing dinosaur fossils for over a millennium. They called it dragon bone medicine. We call it vertebrate paleontology. We were describing the same activity. In Europe, the pattern repeated. Medieval chronicles describe dragon bones found in cliffs and caves throughout the continent. These aren't occasional mentions. These accounts appear throughout the medieval period with remarkable consistency. Monastic records, city archives, noble correspondence, medical texts, bestiaries. The bones are everywhere in the documentary record, and the bones are real. Modern paleontologists examining medieval descriptions can identify many of them. Marine reptiles like ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, primarily because their fossils erode from coastal cliffs throughout Europe, but also terrestrial dinosaurs where geology exposed them, megalosaurs in England, various theropods in France, sauropods in Germany. The fossils were real. The medievals weren't inventing them. The first dinosaur fossil formally illustrated in scientific literature appears in Robert Plott's Natural History of Oxfordshire, published 1677. Plott was a serious scholar, the first keeper of the Ashmolean Museum, professor of chemistry at Oxford, not a credulous fool, not a medieval mystic, a scientist by the standards of his era. Plot includes an engraving of what he identifies as a dragon's thigh bone found in a quarry near Cornwall. He examines it carefully. He measures it. He compares it to known animals. He concludes it's too large for any living creature. He considers various possibilities. Giant human, which he rejects. Elephant, which doesn't match the morphology. He settles on dragon as the most logical identification given available taxonomic frameworks. The illustration is detailed enough that modern paleontologists can identify it with certainty. It's a Megalosaurus femur, the first theropod dinosaur ever illustrated in scientific literature. Plot calls it a dragon bone, because that's what it obviously is to him. That's the word available in his taxonomic framework for very large fossilized reptilian bones. This is critical. Plot wasn't being superstitious. He was being scientific by his era's standards. He found a bone. He examined it carefully. He applied the best available taxonomic framework. Dragon was a legitimate natural history category in the 17th century science. It meant very large reptile, known from fossil evidence, probably extinct or surviving in unexplored regions. It was natural history, not myth. What fossils the ancients found showed them specific features that appear consistently in dragon descriptions worldwide. Enormous reptilian creatures, unlike any living animal. This is undeniable when you're holding a 6-foot skull with teeth the size of bananas. You know immediately you're looking at something far beyond human scale, far beyond any living reptile. The size forces recognition. Long bodies, sauropod vertebrae found in sequence, create spinal columns stretching dozens of feet. When erosion exposes an articulated section of spine, when you can trace 20 or 30 vertebrae in a row, each the size of a dinner plate, you understand you're looking at a creature of impossible length. 50 feet, 60 feet, longer. The bones prove it. Large teeth and claws. Theropod remains include recurved teeth 3 inches long, designed for puncturing and tearing. Dromaeosaur claws, the famous sickle claws, are perfectly designed for disemboweling prey. Ancient peoples finding these would understand immediately they were weapons, killing tools, evidence of predation at a scale beyond human experience, 4-legged structure. Most dinosaur skeletons recovered, even from fragmentary remains, show quadrupedal stance or at minimum 4 limbs. Sauropods, ceratopsians, stegosaurs, ankylosaurs, all clearly 4-legged. Ancient peoples finding these bones could reconstruct basic body plans. 4 legs, like known reptiles, but much, much larger. Elongated tails. Some fossil finds include nearly complete articulated skeletons, with tails extending 20, 30, 40 feet or more. These aren't subtle. These are massive structures. Ancient peoples finding complete or partially complete skeletons could see the proportions. Small head relative to body. Long neck in some species. Massive body. Enormously long tail. The proportions match dragon descriptions precisely. Skulls with prominent features. This is where it gets specific. Ceratopsian skulls like Triceratops have massive frills and horns. Pachycephalosaur skulls have thick domed craniums. Hadrosaurs have elaborate crests. Theropods have prominent ridges and horns above the eyes. Ancient peoples finding these skulls would see clear evidence of cranial elaboration. Horns, crests, frills. Bizarre structures unknown in living animals. Dragon illustrations consistently show elaborate head structures, horns, crests, multiple eyes or eye-like structures. This comes directly from observing fossilized skulls with cranial elaboration. All of these features appear in dragon descriptions worldwide with remarkable consistency. The ancients weren't imagining, they were extrapolating from physical evidence. They found bones, lots of bones, bones everywhere. They tried to reconstruct the living animal. They got remarkably close to correct. But fossils alone don't explain fire breathing or flight. So where do those elements come from? Second component, living reptiles, monitor lizards, particularly large species. These are not obscure animals. These are widespread, observable, dangerous reptiles that ancient peoples encountered regularly. The Komodo dragon, not discovered by Western science until 1910, but known to Indonesian peoples for thousands of years, grows to 10 feet in length and can weigh over 300 pounds. It's an apex predator. It's aggressive. It has venom-delivering teeth and bacteria-laden saliva that causes deadly infections in bite victims. It can take down prey much larger than itself through ambush tactics and patience. A Komodo dragon hunting is genuinely terrifying to witness. It's fast despite its size, capable of running bursts up to 12 miles per hour. It's intelligent, using cover and strategy and what appears to be deliberate deception. Its bite delivers venom that causes shock, prevents blood clotting, lowers blood pressure, and induces paralysis. Victims weaken progressively over hours or days. They go into shock. They bleed continuously from wounds that won't close. They become weak and disoriented. The dragon follows at a distance, waiting, tracking. When the prey collapses from blood loss and venom, the dragon feeds. To observers without scientific knowledge of venom and bacteria and shock physiology, a Komodo attack would seem supernatural. The victim is bitten once. The wound doesn't seem immediately fatal, but the victim sickens mysteriously. They weaken progressively. They develop fever. They become delirious. Eventually they collapse and die. The dragon appears afterward and consumes the body. To pre-scientific observers, this looks like curse or magic or poison of supernatural potency. The dragon didn't just kill with physical trauma. It killed with something else, something invisible, something that works through time. Moreover, Komodo dragons exhibit behaviors that seem fantastical to pre-modern observers. They can consume up to 80% of their body weight in a single meal. A 200-pound dragon can consume 160 pounds of meat in one sitting. The visible distension of their bodies after feeding is dramatic. They look pregnant. They look impossibly swollen. They look like they've consumed something far too large to fit inside them. They swallow large prey whole or in massive chunks, not delicate feeding, not careful eating. They tear off huge pieces and swallow them. Skulls, entire limbs, hooves, horns, bone, everything. They have flexible skull joints that allow their jaws to open extremely wide. They have backwards pointing teeth that prevent prey from escaping once bitten. They have powerful stomach acid that dissolves bone. They regurgitate indigestible parts days later, producing pellets of hair and hooves and horns. To ancient observers, this would seem like impossible consumption, like bottomless appetite, like magical digestion. They have forked tongues that constantly flick, tasting the air. To ancient observers unfamiliar with Jacobson's organ and chemical sensing, this resembles serpent behavior in unsettling ways. It's uncanny, it's rhythmic, it's constant. The tongue flickers in and out dozens of times per minute. It looks like the dragon is tasting reality itself, sampling the air for information invisible to human senses. They make hissing sounds when threatened, deep, powerful hisses. In certain acoustical environments, in caves or enclosed spaces, this could sound like roaring or rumbling. It echoes, it resonates. It's intimidating far beyond the actual volume. Ancient peoples hearing this sound without seeing the source might interpret it as something far larger and more dangerous. Their saliva appears toxic. It is toxic. The combination of bacteria and venom creates a deadly cocktail. But to ancient observers, the saliva itself would seem like poison, like acid, like something supernatural. Victims of Komodo bites often report burning sensations. intense pain beyond what the physical damage would suggest. The venom is working, but it feels like curse. Now monitor lizard observations with crocodilians. Saltwater crocodiles reach 20 feet and can weigh over 2,000 pounds. They're reptilian. They have massive jaws capable of crushing bone with several thousand pounds of pressure per square inch. They're semi-aquatic, explaining dragons' association with water in many traditions. They're armored with osteoderms, bony plates embedded in their skin. They're apex predators that have existed largely unchanged for millions of years. They're living fossils. They look prehistoric because they are prehistoric. Crocodiles can remain motionless for hours, waiting, patient, then explode into violent action in seconds. They can launch themselves entirely out of water to snatch prey from overhanging branches. They can drown animals much larger than themselves through death rolls, spinning violently in water while gripping prey in their jaws. To ancient peoples, this combination of patience and explosive violence would seem intelligent, strategic, calculating. Ancient peoples observed these living reptiles, large, dangerous, reptilian, predatory, possessing behaviors that seemed impossible or supernatural. Then they found fossil evidence of reptiles that were much, much larger. The synthesis is natural. These bones come from giant versions of the dangerous reptiles we know. The giant reptiles probably still exist somewhere, in remote regions we haven't fully explored. They probably exhibit even more extreme versions of the dangerous behaviors we observe in living reptiles. The logic is sound given available knowledge. We see 10-foot monitor lizards. We find fossil bones from reptiles that were 60 feet long. Obviously, the 60-foot reptiles existed. Obviously, they were even more dangerous than the 10-foot versions we know. Obviously, they're probably still alive somewhere. This is rational extrapolation from genuine evidence. The scientific confirmation came in stages throughout the 19th century as Western paleontology developed. But the most dramatic vindication came from exactly where ancient texts said it would. China, the Gobi Desert, the gold-bearing regions of Central Asia. Chinese paleontology in the early 20th century revealed something extraordinary. The Longgu collection sites that Chinese traditional medicine had been using for over 1,000 years aligned precisely with major fossil beds identified by Western paleontology. The ancients weren't randomly finding scattered fossils. They'd systematically identified the richest fossil deposits in China. They knew where the bones were. They knew which formations produced the best specimens. They knew which geological strata to target. They'd been doing stratigraphic paleontology for a millennium without calling it that. In 1923, Roy Chapman Andrews led American Museum of Natural History expeditions to the Gobi Desert in Mongolia. They were searching for early human fossils, trying to test the hypothesis that humans originated in Central Asia. Instead, they found extraordinary dinosaur remains, complete skeletons, articulated specimens, nesting sites, eggs, multiple species, all preserved in remarkable condition by rapid burial in ancient sandstorms, including dozens of complete Protoceratops skeletons. Protoceratops andrewsi is a four-legged dinosaur roughly 6 feet long. It has a prominent beak, distinctly bird-like, curved and powerful. It has a large neck frill that extends backward from the skull, creating a shield-like structure that can be interpreted various ways depending on how the fossil is preserved. It's found in desert deposits that were arid even when the animal lived 75 million years ago. The geology is clear. These animals lived in desert environments, dry, sandy, harsh, and it's found exactly where ancient Greeks described griffin nests. Adrienne Mayer made this connection explicit in her 2000 book, The First Fossil Hunters, Paleontology in Greek and Roman Times. Mayer is a serious scholar, research scholar in classics and history of science at Stanford University. Her work is published by Princeton University Press. It's cited in Nature, in Science, in National Geographic, in Smithsonian Magazine. This isn't fringe theory. This is mainstream historical scholarship examining the intersection of classical studies and paleontology. Mayer examined 3 independent data sets: the geographic distribution of griffin legends in ancient Greek, Roman, and Scythian texts, the geographic distribution of Protoceratops fossils as mapped by 20th century paleontologists, ancient gold mining regions in Central Asia as documented by archaeological and geological surveys. All 3 overlap with remarkable precision. Griffin legends appear precisely where Protoceratops fossils erode naturally from surface deposits and where ancient peoples mined gold. The ancient Greeks knew about griffins primarily through Scythian sources. The Scythians were nomadic peoples who ranged across the steppes of Central Asia. They traded with Greeks. They fought with Greeks. They told Greeks about their lands. And they described griffins. Consistently, specifically, with geographic precision. Herodotus, writing around 440 BC in his Histories, Book 3, Chapter 116, describes the griffins. He's reporting what he was told by Scythian sources. He's explicit about this. He hasn't seen griffins himself, but his informants describe them consistently. The griffins live in the far north, beyond the lands of the Scythians, in regions rich with gold. They are 4-legged creatures with bodies like lions and heads like eagles. They have large beaks. They build nests on the ground. They guard gold fiercely. They attack anyone who approaches their nesting sites. The bones of these creatures are found in the same regions where gold is mined. This is not vague mythology. This is specific geographic and behavioral information. And it aligns precisely with Protoceratops fossil distribution. Ancient Greeks and Scythians worked gold deposits in regions of Central Asia, where Protoceratops is the dominant fossil species. The Altai Mountains, the Tian Shan, regions of modern Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Western China. These are major gold-producing regions. Ancient peoples mined these areas extensively, and wind erosion in these regions constantly exposes Protoceratops fossils. This is critical. The Gobi Desert and surrounding regions have unique preservation conditions. Rapid burial in sandstorms during the Cretaceous period created complete articulated skeletons. The dry climate prevents decay. Wind erosion constantly removes surface sediment, exposing fossils. An ancient person walking through these regions would regularly encounter fossils weathering out of the ground. Not rare, not occasional, regularly, and not fragmentary fossils. Complete skeletons, articulated, looking like they died recently and were perfectly preserved. The preservation quality in these deposits is extraordinary. Skulls with beaks intact, frills complete, all 4 legs present, ribs articulated, spine complete. An ancient miner could find what appears to be an intact animal, recently dead, perfectly preserved, impossibly strange. Now examine what they would see. 4-legged animal. Protoceratops stance is clearly quadrupedal. The legs are positioned under the body. The posture is mammal-like rather than sprawling reptile-like. To ancient observers, this would resemble lion or large cat posture. 4 legs, standing upright, built for movement, large beak, prominent, curved, powerful, designed for shearing vegetation, bird-like, eagle-like, distinctive, impossible to misidentify. This is not subtle. This is the most prominent feature of the skull. A massive beak where you'd expect a mammal to have a nose and jaw. The combination of mammal-like body with bird-like head would be immediately striking. Neck frill extending backward. The frill is a large bony structure. Depending on how the fossil is preserved, depending on whether it's seen from above or from the side, depending on whether sediment has compressed it or left it three-dimensional. It could be interpreted various ways. Folded wings, elaborate crest, defensive shield. To ancient observers without knowledge of ceratopsian anatomy, wings would be a logical interpretation. The structure extends backward from the head. It's clearly not part of the skull proper. It could be folded wings. Found in arid desert regions, the fossils appear in sandstone. The sedimentary context is clearly desert deposition. Even ancient observers could recognize that these animals lived in dry environments. The association with desert is inherent in the geology. Associated with gold. This is geographic coincidence, but to ancient observers it would seem causal. The same geological processes that concentrate gold deposits in certain formations also happen to preserve fossils effectively in the same formations. But ancient peoples wouldn't know this. They would observe, griffins are always found where gold is found. Therefore, griffins must guard gold. The correlation seems obvious. The causation seems logical. Found with eggs. Multiple Protoceratops nests have been discovered with eggs intact. The first dinosaur eggs discovered by science were Protoceratops eggs, found by the Andrews expedition in 1923. The eggs are laid on the ground in clutches. The nests are simple scrapes. Ancient peoples finding these nests would see eggs alongside adult skeletons. The eggs are large enough to be impressive, but small enough to be clearly eggs. The association would be clear. These creatures laid eggs. They nested on the ground. They guarded their nests. Protective posture. Some specimens are found in positions suggesting defense of nests or young. Some show evidence of death while brooding. Ancient observers finding adult skeletons positioned over egg clutches would interpret this as protective behavior. These creatures defended their nests. They died defending their young. They were fierce in protection. The interpretation ancient Greeks made was entirely logical given this evidence. Strange creatures with lion-like bodies and eagle-like heads live in gold-bearing deserts. They lay eggs on the ground. They build nests. They guard the gold fiercely. Their remains prove they exist. The bones are real. The eggs are real. The association with gold is consistent. Therefore, these creatures exist. The guarding gold behavior isn't biological. It's geographic association. Fossils appear in gold deposits because the same geological processes that concentrate gold also preserve fossils effectively. But to ancient observers without geological knowledge, the correlation would seem causal. These creatures must guard gold. Why else would their bones always be found where gold exists? It's the simplest explanation. The protective behavior described in Greek accounts makes perfect sense if miners disturbed nest sites. You're mining for gold. You're digging into hillsides and cliff faces. You expose a fossil, a complete skeleton, positioned over eggs. Obviously, this creature died protecting its nest. Obviously, these creatures are protective and dangerous. If you continue mining in areas where you find these nests, you might experience difficulties, accidents, injuries, deaths from other causes that get attributed to the griffin's wrath because you disturbed their nesting grounds. Stories develop, accounts spread, the reputation grows. But the core observation was accurate. Strange skeletons exist in gold regions. They have bodies resembling large four-legged animals. They have heads featuring prominent beaks. They laid eggs. They nested on the ground. Every single element of this description is factually correct. The taxonomy was wrong. They weren't magical creatures. They weren't current fauna. They were extinct dinosaurs. But the observation was right. Modern analysis of Gobi fossil deposits confirms that Protoceratops specimens are extraordinarily well preserved in certain formations. The Jadocta formation in particular produces complete articulated skeletons with remarkable frequency. Rapid burial in sandstorms created instant fossilization. The dry climate prevented bacterial decay. The result is fossils that look fresh, that look recent, that look like they could have died yesterday. This would strongly suggest to ancient observers that the creature existed recently, perhaps still exists. Very old bones are usually fragmentary, scattered by scavenging and weathering, broken down by geological processes. Complete skeletons suggest recent death. Therefore, griffins must still live somewhere, beyond explored territories, in regions we haven't reached yet. The logic is sound given available evidence. The geographic range of griffin legends correlates with Protoceratops fossil distribution with remarkable precision. Mayer's analysis showed that griffin accounts appear in texts from exactly the regions where Protoceratops fossils are most common and most accessible through surface erosion. Areas without Protoceratops fossils have no indigenous griffin traditions. Areas with abundant Protoceratops fossils have elaborate, detailed, consistent griffin traditions. The correlation is statistically significant. This is the critical point. We're not seeing vague similarities between random myths and random fossils. We're seeing precise geographic correlation. The myths appear exactly where the fossils appear, nowhere else. That's not coincidence, that's evidence of observation. Now apply this framework to dragons more broadly across all cultures. Dragon legends worldwide correlate with dinosaur fossil distributions. This isn't vague, this isn't impressionistic. The correlation is mappable. Chinese long traditions are strongest in regions with extensive fossil beds. The Gobi, Sichuan, Liaoning, Yunnan, all major fossil-producing provinces. European dragon legends cluster in areas where marine reptile fossils erode from coastal cliffs. The Jurassic coast in England, the shores of the Mediterranean, the coastlines of Scandinavia. Mesoamerican feathered serpent traditions appear in regions with numerous fossil sites. Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras. The correlation isn't perfect because dragons also incorporate observations of living reptiles, monitor lizards, crocodiles, large snakes. But the foundation, the reason every culture independently developed dragon mythology, is fossil evidence. Dinosaurs existed. Their bones remain. Ancient peoples found them constantly and tried to explain them. Different cultures created different explanations based on local context and cosmology. Chinese scholars integrated dragons into philosophical systems. Yin and yang. 5 elements. Cosmic balance. Europeans made them manifestations of evil. Agents of Satan. Symbols of sin and chaos. Mesoamericans connected them to gods and cosmic cycles. Creation and destruction. Time and calendar. But all were responding to the same physical evidence. Enormous reptilian bones that demanded explanation. The fire-breathing element comes from multiple sources. First, burning coal seams. In regions where dragon legends are prominent, natural coal deposits sometimes ignite and burn for years or decades. This is documented in China, in India, in Europe, in North America. Underground coal fires produce smoke and flames emerging from ground, sulfurous smells, scorched earth. To ancient observers, this looks like a dragon's breath or lair. The connection is natural. Second, volcanic activity. Dragons are frequently associated with volcanic regions. The connection is obvious once you see it. Smoke, fire, explosions, sulfur, destruction, heat that melts rock. If you live near an active volcano and you find enormous reptilian bones in the same region, the synthesis is inevitable. These giant reptiles breathe fire. They live underground. They cause eruptions. The volcanic activity proves they exist. Third, chemical phenomena. Certain minerals produce flames when broken or exposed to moisture. Phosphorescent minerals glow in darkness. Bituminous shales can catch fire when exposed to air. Ancient peoples finding such phenomena near fossil sites might associate them with dragon presence. The dragon died here. Its essence remains. The ground still burns where it fell. Fourth, simple exaggeration. A large monitor lizard hissing aggressively creates impressive display. The mouth gapes, the throat inflates, the hiss is loud and intimidating. In oral tradition, over generations of retelling, the hiss becomes roar, becomes fire. This is normal mythological elaboration. Start with observed behavior, amplify through retelling. Eventually, the creature breathes fire. The flying element comes from pterosaur fossils in some cases. Pterosaur remains are found in many of the same formations as dinosaur remains. Ancient peoples finding these bones, with their elongated wings and strange proportions, would recognize them as flying reptiles. If ground-dwelling reptiles reached 60 feet, and flying reptiles existed, perhaps the largest reptiles could both walk and fly. Perhaps dragons have wings. The logic works, but more commonly, the flying element comes from simply adding bird features to reptilian descriptions. If giant reptiles existed, and birds can fly, perhaps giant reptiles could fly too. Perhaps dragons are reptiles with bird characteristics. Wings, flight, the ability to soar. The griffin already mixed mammal body with bird head. Why not reptile body with bird wings? The synthesis is natural. What modern paleontology reveals is just how accurate dragon mythology actually was in its core observations. Strip away the fire breathing, strip away the magic, strip away the supernatural attributes. What remains is remarkably accurate natural history. Dinosaurs existed, undeniable scientific fact. They were reptilian, taxonomically accurate. Many were enormous. Sauropods reached over 100 feet in length. Some weighed over 50 tons. Some had elaborate head structures. Triceratops frill, Stegosaurus plates, Parasaurolophus crest, Pachycephalosaurus dome, Styracosaurus spikes. The cranial elaboration is real and spectacular. Some had teeth and claws exactly as legends describe. Tyrannosaurus teeth were 9 inches long. Therizinosaurus claws were 3 feet long. The weaponry was real. Some were incredibly long. Diplodocus tails exceeded 40 feet. Argentinosaurus bodies reached 120 feet. The proportions matched descriptions. The only significant errors were assuming they were still alive somewhere, which is wrong because ancient peoples lacked the concept of extinction. Adding fire breathing, based on other phenomena or exaggeration, which is understandable mythological elaboration. Sometimes adding flight based on pterosaurs or birds, which is mixing of observations. Conflating multiple species into single dragon category, which is natural when you lack scientific taxonomy. But the core observation was correct. Giant reptiles existed. Their bones are found in rock. They had diverse forms. Some had elaborate features. They were the largest land animals that ever lived. This is accurate paleontology described without scientific vocabulary. The dragon wasn't fantasy. It was natural history based on fossil evidence, combined with observations of living reptiles, filtered through pre-scientific frameworks. And it was right far more often than it was wrong. When medieval scholars wrote about dragon bones in caves, they were describing real fossils. When Chinese physicians prescribed dragon bone medicine, they were using ground dinosaur fossils, confirmed by chemical analysis of traditional dragon bone medicines. They're genuine fossils. When Greek historians recorded griffin nests in the Gobi, they were reporting Protoceratops fossil sites, confirmed by modern paleontological surveys showing Protoceratops abundance in exactly those regions. All of this was dismissed as myth for centuries, pure fiction, obvious invention, until science excavated the same locations and found exactly what the ancient texts described. The bones were there, the fossils were real. The ancients weren't lying. They weren't hallucinating. They weren't even being particularly superstitious. They were observing and reporting physical evidence using available vocabulary. The dragon was real, not as medieval artists depicted it, not with magic or supernatural power, but as an attempt by intelligent observers to explain genuine fossil evidence of creatures that once lived. Creatures we now call dinosaurs. Creatures whose existence ancient peoples documented accurately, despite lacking words like Mesozoic or Cretaceous or theropod. They said dragon. We say dinosaur. We're describing the same bones. Chapter 2. The unicorn, the beast with the impossible horn. Marco Polo returns from China in 1295 AD. He's been gone 24 years. 24 years traveling through lands no living European has seen. 24 years accumulating observations that will strain credulity. 24 years seeing things that sound impossible. But he tells them anyway. Because he's Marco Polo. Because he's a merchant who trades in information as much as in silk and spices. Because he understands that accurate reporting, even of impossible things, has value. In his account, Divisement du Monde, Description of the World, he describes encountering unicorns. And his description should disturb anyone who thinks they know what a unicorn is. There are wild elephants in the country, and numerous unicorns, which are very nearly as big. They have hair like that of a buffalo, feet like those of an elephant, and a horn in the middle of the forehead, which is black and very thick. They do no mischief with the horn, but with the tongue alone, for this is covered all over with long and strong prickles, and when savage with anyone, they trample him under their feet, and then rasp him with their tongue. The head is like that of a wild boar, and they carry it ever bent towards the ground. They delight much to abide in mire and mud. 'Tis a passing ugly beast to look upon, and is not in the least like that which our stories tell of as being caught in the lap of a virgin, but clean contrary to our notions. Marco Polo is describing a Javan rhinoceros, or possibly an Indian rhinoceros. Obviously, any modern reader recognizes this immediately. He even emphasizes its ugly and unlike European unicorn legends. He's actively contradicting medieval artistic conventions. He's saying, I know what you think unicorns look like. You're wrong. Here's what they actually look like. But here's what's strange. He calls it a unicorn. Unicorno in medieval Italian. He doesn't say this is what ignorant locals wrongly call a unicorn while recognizing it's actually something else. He identifies it as a unicorn, as if European unicorn legends came from somewhere real, as if people already understood that unicorns were large, aggressive, horned beasts living in Asia, and Polo's description merely corrected artistic and poetic embellishments added by Europeans who had never seen one. This suggests something. The unicorn wasn't invented by medieval Europeans as pure fantasy. It came from somewhere, from some older tradition, from some actual observation transmitted through trade routes and centuries until it reached Europe distorted but not entirely disconnected from reality. The confusion deepens when you examine medieval bestiaries. The unicorn appears consistently across hundreds of manuscripts from the 12th through 15th centuries. But descriptions vary dramatically. Some sources show horse-like creatures with delicate spiraling horns, elegant, beautiful, white, pure. Others show massive, aggressive animals, heavy, dangerous, more rhinoceros than horse, more weapon than symbol. The Physiologus, a Greek text compiled around 200 AD in Alexandria, describes the unicorn thus. He is a small animal like a kid, but surprisingly fierce. He has one horn in the middle of his head. No hunter can catch him by force, but only by using this trick. A virgin girl is led to where he dwells, and there she is sent away alone into the wood. As soon as the unicorn sees her, he runs and lays his head in her lap. She caresses him, and he is thus taken captive and led to the king's palace. This is the source of the virgin capturing unicorn legend, the image that dominates medieval and Renaissance art, the unicorn and the virgin, the allegory of Christ and the Virgin Mary, the symbol of purity and incarnation. But examine the description carefully beneath the allegorical overlay. Small animal, like a kid. Not horse-sized, goat-sized. A kid is a young goat. This gives specific scale, yet surprisingly fierce. Fierce enough that despite small size, hunters cannot catch him by force. And the horn is in the middle of his head, specifically located, not on the nose like rhinoceros species known to classical Greeks, on the forehead, centrally positioned. This doesn't describe a delicate magical horse. This describes something real, something small but dangerous, something with a horn positioned distinctly on the forehead rather than on the snout. The allegorical elements are clearly later Christian additions. The virgin capture method is symbolic, but beneath the symbolism lies what might be observation. Different medieval sources give conflicting sizes. Some say horse-sized or larger. Others say smaller, like a goat or deer. The inconsistency suggests multiple sources being conflated, multiple real animals being called unicorn, because unicorn simply means one-horned animal. In Latin, unicornis, from unus meaning one and cornu meaning horn. It's descriptive terminology, not a specific taxonomic identification. So various one-horned animals get called unicorn. The Javan rhinoceros, which has one horn positioned on the snout. The Indian rhinoceros, same. The oryx, an antelope that appears to have one horn when viewed in profile because its two horns align visually. Narwhals, whose tusks were sold in medieval Europe as unicorn horns. All one-horned, all unicorns by definition, but none of these animals have horns positioned centrally on the forehead. Rhinoceros horns are on the snout. Oryx horns emerge from the top of the head. Narwhal tusks are actually teeth projecting from the upper jaw. None match the central forehead positioning described in Physiologus and shown consistently in medieval art. Then came the bones. 1808. Russian scientists excavating mammoth remains in the Siberian permafrost find an enormous skull. It's rhinoceros-like in overall morphology, but larger and differently proportioned. And it has a single massive horn socket in the forehead. Not paired horns positioned on the snout like modern rhinoceros species. One horn, central, located precisely on the forehead where medieval illuminations always put it. Enormous. The creature is named Elasmotherium sibiricum, the Siberian plate beast or Siberian unicorn, and it's exactly what the name suggests. Elasmotherium stood over 6 feet at the shoulder. Some estimates suggest up to 6.5 feet. That's comparable to a large draft horse. It weighed estimated 3 to 5 tons based on limb bone dimensions and comparative anatomy. That's comparable to an adult African elephant. It's massive, truly massive, far larger than any modern rhinoceros species. Its body proportions were more horse-like than modern rhinos. Longer legs relative to body size, more upright posture, less barrel-shaped body. The overall profile, if you saw it from a distance, would resemble a very large, very heavy horse, more than it would resemble a hippopotamus-like modern rhino. This is significant. Medieval descriptions often compare unicorns to horses. That comparison makes sense if based on Elasmotherium rather than modern rhinoceros species. It was covered in thick fur, adapted for Ice Age steppes. Preservation of some specimens shows evidence of dense, shaggy coat, similar to woolly rhinoceros. The fur would have been brown or reddish-brown based on pigment preservation and comparative analysis, not white, Medieval white unicorns are artistic idealization for symbolic purposes. But the fur is real. It was a grazing animal. Toothwear patterns show grass specialization. It was a bulk grazer, consuming large quantities of grass and steppe vegetation. It used its massive horn to sweep snow aside to reach vegetation during winter. This is reconstructed from horn socket angle and attachment points for massive neck muscles. The creature could lower its head and use the horn like a snowplow, clearing areas to access buried grass. This behavior would have been distinctive and observable if humans witnessed it. And the horn. The horn is the critical feature. The horn socket preserved in fossil skulls suggests a structure potentially 5 to 6 feet in length. Estimates vary because the horn itself was keratin, which doesn't fossilize, so we're working from the bony base. But the socket is enormous, far larger than modern rhinoceros horn bases, and the angle of attachment suggests the horn projected forward and slightly upward from the forehead, not straight up like a spike, forward like a lance, like a weapon designed for combat or for plowing through obstacles. A single, massive, forward-projecting horn, 6 feet long, positioned centrally on the forehead, precisely where every unicorn illustration places it, not on the nose like modern rhinos, on the forehead. The match is exact. The geographic range is crucial. Elasmotherium fossils are found across Eurasia from the Iberian Peninsula to Siberia, Spain, France, Germany, Ukraine, Russia, Kazakhstan, China, exactly the regions where unicorn legends appear most prominently in medieval and ancient sources: Western Europe, the Mediterranean, Central Asia, Siberia. The distribution of the myth matches the distribution of fossils with precision that exceeds coincidence. For decades after the initial discovery, the connection between Elasmotherium and unicorn mythology remained speculative. Yes, ancient peoples found these bones. That's undeniable. Elasmotherium fossils erode from riverbanks and cliff faces throughout its range. Ancient peoples absolutely encountered them. But did they create unicorn legends from this evidence? Or is the similarity between fossil and myth merely coincidental? Could unicorns be pure invention that happens to resemble a real extinct animal by chance? 2016. DNA analysis and radiocarbon dating of Elasmotherium remains produces results that change everything. Published in Nature, Ecology and Evolution by Andrei Shpansky and colleagues from Tomsk State University and the Russian Academy of Sciences. The research shows that the most recent Elasmotherium specimens date to approximately 29,000 years ago. Not millions of years, not hundreds of thousands of years. 29,000 years ago, the late Pleistocene, yesterday in geological terms. Some controversial evidence from less certain contexts, using uranium-thorium dating rather than radiocarbon, suggests possible survival until approximately 13,000 years ago. This evidence is disputed. Not all researchers accept it. But even the conservative, widely accepted date of 29,000 years ago is extraordinary. This timeline is critical. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, arrived in Siberia approximately 50,000 years ago. Elasmotherium definitely overlapped with human populations for at least 20,000 years. If the later date is accurate, possibly nearly 40,000 years of overlap. 20,000 to 40,000 years of humans and Elasmotherium occupying the same landscapes. This means Siberian human populations encountered living Elasmotherium, not just fossils, living animals. They hunted in the same territories. They competed for resources. They observed these creatures moving, feeding, fighting. They saw the horn in action. They watched the behavior. They developed knowledge about this animal through direct observation across thousands of generations. Or at minimum, they found very fresh remains, fresh enough to recognize as recently living animals. fresh enough that oral traditions about living Elasmotherium could be preserved and verified by continued discovery of remains that looked recent. Fresh enough that the line between living memory and fossil discovery would have been blurred. Cave art is controversial but suggestive. Rouffignac Cave in France contains engravings that some researchers interpret as Elasmotherium. The markings show large animals with single prominent horns positioned centrally. The style is consistent with other Paleolithic cave art from the region, dated to approximately 13,000 years ago. Not all specialists accept the identification. The images are ambiguous. They could be other species. They could be artistic stylization of known animals. But if they are Elasmotherium, they represent direct human observation and artistic documentation. The Kopova Cave in the Urals contains similar controversial imagery. Large herbivores with prominent single horns, dated to approximately 17,000 years ago. Again, identification is disputed, but the images exist. They show something large with a distinctive single horn. More certain is this: ancient peoples across Eurasia found Elasmotherium fossils constantly. These are large animals. Their bones are massive. Their skulls are distinctive. The horn socket is unmistakable. Anyone finding an Elasmotherium skull would immediately recognize one horn, central position, enormous size. This isn't subtle. This isn't ambiguous. This is clear anatomical evidence of a creature unlike any living animal. The fossils are well preserved in many contexts. Permafrost preservation in Siberia produces remarkable specimen quality. Bog preservation in Northern Europe does likewise. Ancient peoples could find skulls, partial skeletons, even occasionally articulated remains that showed clear body proportions. They could see horse-like body, massive size, single enormous horn on forehead. They could measure. They could compare to known animals. They could attempt reconstruction. Now examine ancient unicorn descriptions with this knowledge. Large, powerful animal. Check. Elasmotherium weighed 3 to 5 tons. It was one of the largest land animals of the Pleistocene. The size is appropriate for descriptions calling unicorns powerful enough to fight elephants or destroy armies. The scale matches. Horse-like body. Check. Elasmotherium proportions were more equine than modern rhinoceros proportions. Longer-legged, more upright. The comparison to horses in medieval texts makes sense if the source observation was Elasmotherium rather than modern rhinos. Single horn on forehead. Check. Exact. Match. This is the critical detail. Modern rhinoceros species don't have horns positioned this way. Fossil and living rhinoceros species known to classical authors don't match. But Elasmotherium does. Perfectly. Fierce. Aggressive. Untamable. Check. Large herbivores are dangerous. Anyone who has encountered an elephant, a water buffalo, a moose, an aurochs, knows that herbivores can be far more aggressive and dangerous than carnivores. An animal the size of Elasmotherium, possessing a 6-foot horn, would have been extraordinarily dangerous, unpredictable, aggressive when threatened, impossible to control, absolutely untamable using any methods available to ancient peoples. Cannot be caught by force. Check. You cannot catch a 5-ton animal with a 6-foot horn using nets, ropes, and spears. It would destroy anyone who tried. The only possible capture methods would involve traps, pits, deception. This matches descriptions saying special methods are required. Force doesn't work. You need strategy. Lives in remote regions. Check. As Elasmotherium declined toward extinction, as human populations expanded, as climate changed, the animals would have retreated to progressively more remote regions. By late Pleistocene, they probably survived only in marginal habitats. Difficult to reach, rarely seen. This creates impression of rarity and remoteness that persists in legend even after extinction. Extremely rare, seldom seen. Check. Late Pleistocene populations were probably quite low. The species was declining. Fossilization is rare relative to living population size. Finding specimens would be uncommon even if you knew where to look. This creates legendary status. Everyone has heard of the animal. Almost no one has actually seen one. Perfect conditions for mythological development, associated with purity and magic. This is cultural overlay. Different cultures added different symbolic meanings. Europeans added Christian allegorical significance. Chinese added cosmological meaning. But the core animal description underneath the symbolism is consistent. Large, horse-like, one-horned, fierce. That's observation. The symbolic meanings are interpretation. The horn has magical medicinal properties. This belief appears across cultures. Ground unicorn horn as panacea, protection against poison, healing power. This probably originates from actual use of fossilized Elasmotherium horn bases. Keratin doesn't fossilize, but bone does. The bony core of the horn mineralizes. Ancient peoples finding these mineralized structures might have powdered them for medicine. Whether this produced any actual effect beyond placebo is questionable, but the practice creates tradition. Unicorn horn medicine becomes established belief based on use of real fossils. The virgin capture method described in Physiologus is clearly allegorical rather than observational. It serves Christian symbolic purposes. Unicorn as Christ, virgin as Mary, capture as incarnation. This is theology, not zoology. But even this might have root in actual animal behavior, if we're generous in interpretation. Some large herbivores, particularly males, become calmer in presence of human females. The pheromones are different. The threat perception is different. This is observed in modern animal handling. Whether ancient peoples noticed this and incorporated it into unicorn legends is speculative, but possible. Now, the critical question that skeptics raise. If Elasmotherium survived until 29,000 years ago and humans were present, why don't we have definitive evidence of interaction? Why no butchery marks on Elasmotherium bones? Why no Elasmotherium remains in human middens? Why no unambiguous cave art? The answer is likely population density. Elasmotherium was probably rare even before extinction. Large, slow-reproducing herbivore in declining populations. Human population density in the late Pleistocene was also low. The probability of humans successfully hunting Elasmotherium, as opposed to encountering it and avoiding it, was probably quite low. The animal was dangerous. The horn was lethal. The size was intimidating. Unless you're desperate, you hunt easier prey. The lack of butchery marks doesn't mean no interaction. It means Elasmotherium probably wasn't a preferred prey species. Too dangerous. Too difficult. Why risk death hunting a 5-ton animal with a 6-foot horn when you can hunt horse or bison or deer instead? The lack of definitive cave art might just be identification difficulty. The controversial images might be Elasmotherium. We just can't be certain. Paleolithic art is often ambiguous. Species identification from stylized paintings is difficult. What we can be certain of is this. Elasmotherium existed. It survived until at least 29,000 years ago. Humans were present throughout its range during this period. Therefore, humans encountered it. Whether as living animals or very fresh remains, humans had evidence of this creature's existence. They described it. They transmitted the descriptions. Eventually, the descriptions reached Mediterranean civilizations and medieval Europe. The details were modified. Artistic embellishments were added. Christian symbolism was overlaid. But the core description, large horse-like animal with single forward-projecting horn on forehead, remained consistent because it was based on physical evidence. The alternative explanation is that medieval Europeans independently invented the unicorn as pure fantasy, and by pure coincidence invented a creature that precisely matches an extinct animal they had no knowledge of. The proportions match, the horn position matches, the geographic distribution of fossils matches the distribution of legends, the size matches, the temperament descriptions match what we'd expect from a large, unpredictable herbivore. All of this is coincidence? It's possible. Coincidences happen. But it strains probability. The simpler explanation is observation. Ancient peoples found elasmotherium remains. They described accurately what they found. The descriptions were transmitted. Medieval Europeans received garbled, but not entirely inaccurate information. They filled in details with artistic interpretation. But the foundation was real. When Marco Polo encountered rhinoceros in Asia and said these are unicorns, just ugly ones, he wasn't correcting pure fantasy. He was correcting artistic embellishment of real animal descriptions. He was saying, the animal is real, but it's not beautiful and white like our paintings show. It's large and ugly and aggressive, but it has one horn. It's a unicorn. Different one-horned animals got called unicorn. This created confusion. Rhinoceros are unicorns. Elasmotherium fossils represent unicorns. Oryx viewed in profile look like unicorns. Narwhal tusks are unicorn horns. All true in their way. All one-horned. All unicorns, by definition. But the classic unicorn of a medieval imagination, the horse-like creature with single horn on forehead, that specific description matches Elasmotherium and nothing else. The match is too specific, too precise, too geographically correlated to be accidental. The unicorn was real, not alive in medieval Europe, not available for capture in gardens, not tameable by virgins in some literal sense, but real as an Ice Age megafauna that humans encountered and described, real as a fossil found across Eurasia, real as evidence that ancient peoples tried to understand and explain using available frameworks. They said, unicorn. We say, Elasmotherium sibiricum. We're describing the same horn, the same skull, the same legend built on genuine observation of impossible creatures that were merely extinct. Chapter 3. The Behemoth. When Scripture described fossils. The book of Job is ancient, older than most of the Hebrew Bible by scholarly consensus, older than the Pentateuch, possibly older than the Exodus traditions. Dating is uncertain, but many scholars place its composition between 2000 and 1500 BC, based on linguistic analysis, theological development, and cultural context. That's 3,500 to 4,000 years ago. Bronze Age, before classical Greece, before the Phoenician alphabet spread. Deep antiquity, the book is poetry, philosophical dialogue, theodicy exploring suffering and divine justice. It's not natural history, it's not attempting scientific description. But embedded within the poetry are descriptions of creatures. And one of these descriptions has disturbed biblical translators for 2 millennia. Job chapter 40, verses 15 through 24. God is speaking to Job, demonstrating divine power by describing creatures of creation that Job cannot control or comprehend. Behold now Behemoth, which I made with thee. He eateth grass as an ox. Lo now, his strength is in his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. He moveth his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. His bones are as strong pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. He is the chief of the ways of God. He that made him can make his sword to approach unto him. For 2,000 years, interpreters argued about Behemoth's identity. The most common proposals: hippopotamus, elephant, water buffalo, crocodile. Each has problems. Hippopotamus tails are small, maybe 12 inches long, not like a cedar tree. Elephants' tails are thin and taper dramatically. Water buffalo don't match the size implications or the bone descriptions. Crocodile might work for some elements, but not for grass eating or the tail comparison. The tail description is the critical problem that has vexed translators for millennia. He moveth his tail like a cedar. Cedar trees are large. The cedars of Lebanon mentioned throughout biblical texts are Cedrus libani, massive evergreen trees reaching heights of 100 to 130 feet, with trunks 6 to 8 feet in diameter. They're proverbially large, mighty, prominent, used for construction of temples and palaces because of their size and strength. No living land animal has a tail like a cedar tree. This is simply biological fact. The largest modern land animal tails belong to elephants, and they're nothing like cedar trees. They're thin, whip-like, designed for swatting flies. Even hippos, rhinos, buffalo, the largest modern herbivores, have relatively modest tails compared to body size. Translators have attempted various solutions to this problem. Some suggest tail is euphemism for genitals, making the passage about sexual prowess. This is linguistically possible. The Hebrew word zanav usually means tail, but might have secondary meanings. But this interpretation seems forced. The text is describing the creature's physical impressiveness, not its reproductive capability. The surrounding verses describe bones, strength, body structure. Sexual euphemism disrupts the thematic flow. Some suggest the text is corrupt. Copyist error. Perhaps the original read something different. But there's no textual evidence for this. All manuscript traditions preserve the cedar comparison. It's original. It's intentional. It's what the author meant to say. Some suggest it's purely mythological. Behemoth is a fantasy creature. The impossible tail description proves it's not meant as natural history. This is the consensus view for the past 2 centuries. Behemoth is symbol. Allegory. Theological concept, not biology. Then paleontology discovered sauropods. Sauropod dinosaurs, the long-necked herbivores, Diplodocus, Apatosaurus, Brachiosaurus, Camarasaurus, Argentinosaurus, Sauroposeidon. These creatures have tails that absolutely could be described as like cedar trees, not metaphorically, literally. The comparison is apt. Diplodocus carnegie, first described in 1901, but known from multiple specimens found throughout the American West, had a tail exceeding 40 feet in length, composed of over 80 vertebrae. The tail was massive at the base, thick as a tree trunk, tapering gradually along its length. The structure was rigid but flexible, capable of being moved like a whip. But the scale was enormous, far beyond any living animal's tail, cedar-like in size, prominence, and structural appearance. Apatosaurus louisii had similarly impressive tail dimensions. The vertebrae at the base of the tail were 1.5 feet in diameter. The tail extended 40 feet. When complete with muscle and skin, it would have been truly massive, tree-like. The comparison to cedar is not hyperbole. The bone description in Job makes sense for fossilized dinosaur bones. His bones are as strong pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. This is accurate description of mineralized sauropod bones. When dinosaur bones fossilize, they're replaced by minerals, primarily various forms of silica and calcite. The organic bone material is gone. What remains is stone, but stone that retains the shape and internal structure of bone. The weight is tremendous. A fossilized sauropod femur can weigh several hundred pounds. When you pick it up, it feels metallic, dense, heavy beyond expectation. The description as brass or iron is phenomenologically accurate. Tubes of brass describes fossilized long bones with precision. Sauropod limb bones are hollow. This is weight reduction adaptation. Solid bone of that size would be impossibly heavy. The animal couldn't move. So the bones evolved as hollow tubes with internal struts for strength. When these bones fossilize, when they're found eroding from rock, when you examine them in cross-section, the tubular structure is obvious. The walls are thick, like metal tubing. The internal structure shows channels and spaces. To ancient observers, these look manufactured, like someone made tubes from metal. The comparison is natural. The description chief of the ways of God, or first of the great acts of God, makes sense if encountering very large sauropod bones. If you find a femur 5 feet long and 2 feet in diameter, you understand immediately that this creature was the largest thing that ever walked. The size forces the conclusion. This was God's greatest creation in terms of sheer physical magnitude. The superlative is justified, not hyperbole. Accurate assessment based on physical evidence, he eateth grass as an ox, is taxonomically correct. Sauropods were herbivores. Their teeth show wear patterns consistent with plant consumption. They had peg-like or spoon-shaped teeth designed for stripping vegetation, not chewing. They swallowed stones, gastroliths, to help grind plant material in their guts. They consumed vast quantities of vegetation daily to fuel their enormous bodies. The comparison to ox, a large herbivore known to the biblical audience, is appropriate and accurate. Now the critical question: where would Job's author encounter sauropod fossils? The geographic setting of Job is debated, but typically identified as Uz, a region mentioned elsewhere in biblical texts. Based on various textual clues, Uz is usually placed in the general area of modern Jordan, northwestern Saudi Arabia, or possibly the desert regions east of Canaan. The exact location is uncertain, but the general region is clear: the Levantine borderlands between settled areas and desert. This region contains Mesozoic sedimentary formations that preserve dinosaur fossils. Not abundantly, not as richly as the Gobi or the American West, but fossils are present. And ancient peoples didn't need abundant fossils. They needed to find one impressive specimen, one massive bone, one undeniable piece of evidence. The Gibeath Hamor Formation in Israel, exposed in the Carmel Range and other areas, contains early Cretaceous deposits. Dinosaur fossils have been discovered in these formations, though not extensively studied until recently. The Kernub Group in Jordan, exposed along the Rift Valley and in southern regions, contains early Cretaceous sandstones and conglomerates. Dinosaur remains have been found, including theropod teeth and sauropod bones. Further south, the Wadi Rum region of Jordan exposes extensive Paleozoic and Mesozoic formations. Sauropod fossils have been discovered in several localities. The preservation is typically fragmentary due to erosion, but substantial remains have been found. In Saudi Arabia, the Sac sandstone and overlying formations contain Paleozoic and Mesozoic deposits. Dinosaur fossils have been found in the northwestern regions, though documentation is limited due to restricted access for research. The key point is this: dinosaur fossils exist in the region where Job is set. Not theoretical, not speculative. Documented by modern paleontological surveys. Sauropod remains have been found in Jordan, in Israel, in Saudi Arabia, in the broader Middle Eastern region. These fossils were present and accessible to ancient peoples. Surface erosion exposes fossils continually. Wind and rain wear away softer rock, revealing harder fossilized bone. A shepherd in ancient Jordan, tending flocks in desert regions, moving through wadis and eroded landscapes, could easily have discovered sauropod vertebrae or limb bones weathering out of a cliff face or a dry riverbed. The preservation would typically be fragmentary. Complete skeletons are rare even in rich fossil beds, but fragmentary remains are sufficient. One massive vertebra, one segment of tail, one limb bone. Any of these would demonstrate the creature's scale and provide anatomical details matching Job's description. The text's precision suggests direct observation, or at least reporting from someone who observed directly. Tail like cedar, is not a generic description. It's specific. It describes exactly what sauropod tails resemble: rigid, massive, tree-like structures. Bones like brass and iron describes fossilized bone texture and weight with accuracy that exceeds what you'd expect from pure invention. These are observational details. Phenomenological accuracy. Someone saw something and described what they saw. However, we must be cautious. Many biblical scholars interpret behemoth as purely mythological or symbolic. Some identify it as hippopotamus, despite the tail problem, arguing that ancient Near Eastern peoples encountered hippos in Egypt, and the description conflates features from multiple animals. Others see behemoth as composite creature drawing on various animals and mythological traditions, not meant to correspond to any single biological entity. The sauropod interpretation, while intriguing to paleontologically informed readers, is not scholarly consensus. Moreover, the context matters. Job 40-41 describes two creatures: Behemoth and Leviathan. Leviathan is clearly mythological. Breathing fire, having scales no spear can penetrate, making the sea boil. These are supernatural descriptions, symbolic of chaos and divine power over chaos. If Leviathan is mythological, perhaps Behemoth is too. Perhaps both are meant as theological symbols rather than natural history. But there's a counter-argument. Contrast the descriptions carefully. Leviathan uses supernatural language. His breath kindles coals. Flames dart from his mouth. He makes the deep boil like a pot. This is clearly not naturalistic description. This is mythological language drawing on ancient Near Eastern chaos monster traditions. Behemoth uses naturalistic language. He eats grass. His strength is in his loins. His bones are like metal. He drinks from rivers. This is physical, observable description. The only supernatural element is the statement that only God can approach him with a sword, which could mean simply that humans cannot hunt or control him. The description is grounded in physical characteristics, not mythological attributes. The author may distinguish between two types of divine demonstration. Leviathan represents God's power over chaos and cosmic forces, mythological, symbolic. Behemoth represents God's power demonstrated through the natural world, the largest, strongest creature in creation, physical, observable. Both serve theological purposes, but one is drawn from myth, while the other might be drawn from observation of physical evidence. Young Earth creationists have embraced the sauropod interpretation enthusiastically, using it as evidence that humans and dinosaurs coexisted. This requires extreme caution. The text describes bones, not living animals. If Job's author encountered fossils, this is paleontological observation, not contemporary zoology. Nothing in the text requires living behemoth. The description works equally well, better even, if describing fossilized remains. Massive bones, mineralized, heavy as metal, turned to stone. This is fossil description. The simplest explanation that respects both the text and science is this. Job's author or sources encountered sauropod fossils, probably fragmentary remains exposed by erosion in desert regions, described them with accuracy, integrated them into theological poetry about God's creative power and the limits of human ability. The poetry is theology. The description might preserve paleontology. Both coexist in the text without contradiction. This interpretation is speculative. It's not proven. It's not consensus. Many scholars prefer symbolic or mythological readings, but the precision of the tail description and the bone descriptions is striking. Cedar-like tail and metallic bones describe sauropod fossils with accuracy that exceeds what pure invention would likely produce. Behemoth might preserve one of the oldest dinosaur descriptions in literature. written potentially 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, describing fossils with details that match modern paleontological understanding of sauropod anatomy. The author saw something, probably massive fossilized bones eroding from rock, described them accurately using available vocabulary, concluded this was evidence of God's greatest creative achievement in the animal kingdom. The bones were real. The observation might have been accurate. The interpretation, this is the chief of God's works, was theological response to genuine natural evidence. Or behemoth is purely symbolic, a literary device, theological construct, composite creature. The debate continues among biblical scholars and will likely never be fully resolved. What we can say with certainty is this: sauropod fossils exist in the Middle East. They were present and accessible to ancient peoples. They were available to be found, examined, and described. And the description in Job, particularly the tail-like cedar, matches sauropod anatomy with specificity that demands explanation. Coincidence is possible, but the tail-like cedar wasn't poetic exaggeration if describing fossils. It was accurate description of what sauropod tails actually look like. Tree-like, massive, prominent. Cedar is the perfect comparison. No living animal works. Sauropod works perfectly. The bones like brass and iron describes fossilized bone phenomenology with precision. Someone observed mineralized dinosaur bones and described accurately how they feel and appear. Heavy, metallic, tube-like. This is fossil description. Whether Job's author knew he was describing an extinct animal or thought behemoth still lived in remote regions is unclear. Ancient peoples lacked the concept of extinction. If they found bones, they assumed the animal still existed somewhere. The bones were evidence of existence, not evidence of extinction. But the bones were real. The description might be real. And if so, behemoth represents Bronze Age paleontology, preserved in scripture, waiting 4 millennia for science to recognize what the ancients had already documented. The tail like cedar, the bones like iron. These weren't metaphors. They might have been phenomenologically accurate descriptions of sauropod fossils, observation preserved as poetry, evidence preserved as theology, truth preserved as myth. Chapter 4. The Thunderbird. When legends had wingspans. Native American legends across North America describe the Thunderbird. Not one tribe's legend, not one region's tradition, dozens of tribes, hundreds of accounts, from peoples separated by thousands of miles. Tribes that had minimal contact before European colonization, all describing fundamentally similar creatures. The consistency is disturbing. Algonquian peoples in the Northeast describe it. Iroquois, Ojibwe, Menominee. Sioux peoples on the Great Plains describe it. Lakota, Dakota, Nakota. Pacific Northwest peoples describe it. Kwakwakawaku, Haida, Tlingit, Nuchanoth. California peoples describe it. Yurok, Hoopa, Wiyot. Southwestern peoples describe it. Navajo, Zuni, Pueblo cultures. The distribution is continental, coast to coast, north to south. Different cultures, different languages, different cosmologies, but all with Thunderbird traditions. The descriptions show remarkable consistency across vast distances and cultural boundaries. Wingspan so large it blocks the sun when the bird flies overhead. Not small, not moderate, enormous. Large enough to cast shadow that darkens the land. Wing beats that create thunder, hence the name Thunderbird. The sound of the wings is the sound of storms. The two are equivalent. Eyes that flash lightning during storms. The bird and the storm are connected. The bird brings storms or appears during storms. Strength sufficient to carry off deer or other large prey. Not scavenging. Active predation, carrying prey in flight. Occasionally carries off children or threatens humans. The bird is dangerous to people, not benign, not symbolic only, threatening, closely associated with storms and weather. Always this association, never separate from meteorological phenomena, appears in specific regions, particularly Pacific Northwest and Great Plains. Geographic specificity, not universal, not everywhere, concentrated in certain landscapes, considered powerful, dangerous, worthy of respect and fear, not merely large, powerful in spiritual sense, dangerous in practical sense. Western science dismissed these accounts as obvious metaphor, symbolic representations of weather phenomena, thunder and lightning personified as a bird, spiritual concepts given animal form, not descriptions of real birds. Birds large enough to carry children violate physics. The square cube law prohibits such size in flying animals. Maximum wingspan for flying birds is limited by structural mechanics and aerodynamics. Maybe 12 feet for the largest conceivable species living today. Nothing remotely capable of carrying a deer. The accounts were clearly spiritual mythology, not zoological observation. Thunderbird was explained as thunder god, weather deity, totem, symbol, not animal. Then came Rancho La Brea, 1909. Paleontologists working the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles, excavating Pleistocene fossils from asphalt deposits, find something unexpected among the dire wolves and saber-toothed cats. Bird bones, enormous bird bones, far larger than any modern flying bird species, far beyond anything that should be able to achieve powered flight. The bird is named Pterotornis merriami after John Campbell Merriam, paleontologist who directed much of the La Brea work. The name means Merriam's wonderbird, Pterotornis, literally wonderbird or monster bird. The name reflects the astonishment of discovery. The measurements are extraordinary, even by paleontological standards. Wingspan estimated at 11 to 12 feet, based on wing bone proportions and comparative anatomy with modern raptors. Weight approximately 33 pounds based on bone density and skeletal dimensions. For comparison, the largest modern flying bird, the Andean condor, has a wingspan of 10 to 10.5 feet and weighs 25 to 33 pounds maximum. Pterotornis merriami was at, or slightly beyond, the upper limit of modern flying birds. The largest natural flying bird of the modern era is matched or exceeded by an extinct North American species. But 11 to 12 feet, while impressive and remarkable, still doesn't fully explain Thunderbird legends. A bird with 12-foot wingspan is large, very large. But it can't carry deer, can't block the sun in dramatic fashion described in legends, can't create thunder audible across valleys. The legends describe something beyond what Pterotornis merriami's dimensions suggest. Except Pterotornis merriami wasn't the largest pterotorn. Further excavations through the 20th century revealed larger species. The genus proved more diverse than initially recognized. Pterotornis woodburnensis, discovered in Oregon from late Pleistocene deposits, larger than merriami. Wingspan estimated at 13 to 14 feet, based on humerus and ulnar measurements. Cathartornis gracilis from Peru, similar size to merriami but different proportions. Not North American distribution, but showing that pterotorns were widespread throughout the Americas. And then Aeolornis incredibilis, the incredible wonderbird, discovered in Nevada from late Pleistocene deposits by Hildegard Howard in 1952. Wingspan estimated at 15 to 17 feet based on complete wing bones. Some estimates push towards 17.5 feet. This is substantially beyond modern flying birds. This is approaching small aircraft dimensions, 17 feet. For context, that's the length of a large pickup truck. That's 2.5 times human height. A bird with 17-foot wingspan flying overhead would cast a shadow the size of a small room. The visual impact would be dramatic, undeniable, memorable across generations. More critically, the geographic distribution of Thunderbird legends correlates with teratorn fossil distributions. This is not vague. This is mappable. Pacific Northwest legends. Dense concentration of thunderbird traditions among coastal and inland peoples from Alaska to California. Teratornis merriami fossils found in coastal California, Oregon coastal ranges, inland valleys. Teratornis woodburnensis, specifically from Oregon. The overlap is significant. Great Plains legends, strong thunderbird traditions among Sioux peoples, Pawnee, various plains cultures. Teratornis merriami fossils found in Nebraska, South Dakota, New Mexico, Texas. Cave deposits, tar seeps, multiple localities. The fossils are present where the legends are strongest. Southwestern legends. Thunderbird appears in Pueblo traditions, Navajo traditions, various southwestern cultures. Teratornis fossils found in Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, California. Again, presence of fossils correlates with presence of legends. The correlation is striking when mapped. Areas with rich teratorn fossil deposits have elaborate thunderbird traditions. Areas without teratorn fossils generally lack indigenous thunderbird traditions, though some traditions might have spread through cultural contact. Now examine Native American descriptions with paleontological knowledge. Wingspan blocks the sun. A 17-foot bird flying overhead at, say, 100 feet altitude would cast a shadow approximately 20 to 25 feet in diameter, depending on sun angle. That's a large shadow, very large. In dramatic oral retelling across generations, large shadow becomes blocks the sun. This is normal mythological amplification. Start with observed large shadow. Amplify through retelling. Eventually, the bird blocks the sun. But the foundation is real observation of genuinely large shadow cast by genuinely large bird. Wing beats create thunder. Large birds make significant noise in flight. Andean condors with 10-foot wingspan produce loud whooshing sounds audible from considerable distance. The primary feathers create turbulence that generates sound. The larger the wing, the proportionally louder the sound. A bird with 17-foot wingspan would create substantially more noise. Perhaps 2 to 3 times the volume of condor wing beats based on wing area calculations. In certain acoustic environments, in mountainous terrain where sound echoes and amplifies, in stormy conditions when the bird might be spotted flying during weather fronts, the sound of wings could blend with actual thunder, creating association. The bird's wings make thunder-like sounds. Thunder occurs when bird is present. Therefore, the bird creates thunder. The logic is understandable given observational evidence. Eyes flash lightning. This is probably pure mythological addition based on storm association. Large birds don't produce lightning, obviously, but large predatory birds do have eyes that reflect light strikingly. Raptors have forward-facing eyes with reflective tapetum. In certain lighting conditions, the eyes flash brilliantly. This might contribute to descriptions, but more likely, the lightning element comes from observing large birds during thunderstorms and associating the bird with all storm phenomena. The bird appears during storms. Storms have lightning. Therefore, the bird produces lightning. Association becomes attribution, strong enough to carry deer. This is where paleontology and biomechanics become fascinating. Could Teratornis or larger teratorn species actually carry large prey? The question requires examining 2 things: absolute strength and flight mechanics. Modern eagles can carry approximately half their body weight in powered flight. A 30-pound eagle can carry 15 pounds. This is well documented. Bald eagles regularly carry salmon weighing 10 to 15 pounds. Golden eagles can carry young deer, fawns weighing 15 to 20 pounds, though this is at the extreme edge of capability. Teratornis merriami at 33 pounds could theoretically carry 15 to 17 pounds, based on similar proportional strength to modern large raptors. That's sufficient for fawns. Young deer, small children, not full-grown deer, but juveniles, Absolutely. Iolornis incredibilis is more interesting. Estimated body weight is 70 to 80 pounds, based on bone dimensions and proportional comparison to modern birds and to smaller teratons. If capable of carrying even 1/3 of body weight, that's 25 pounds. Sufficient for larger fawns, young deer, human children. If capable of approaching half body weight like modern eagles, that's 35 to 40 pounds. That's sufficient for substantial prey. But could a bird that size actually fly while carrying such loads? This requires examining wing loading and power requirements. Modern calculations suggest maximum wingspan for powered flight under Earth's gravity and atmospheric density is approximately 25 to 30 feet, depending on aspect ratio and body mass distribution. Iolornis at 17 feet is well within theoretical limits. The bird could certainly fly. Whether it could carry prey while flying depends on wing morphology and flight style. Teratornis were likely soaring birds like modern condors, using thermals and updrafts to gain altitude with minimal energy expenditure. Soaring birds can carry more than active flapping flyers because they're not fighting gravity continuously. They use air currents. If Teratornis could gain altitude using thermals, it could then glide while carrying prey, using gravity to assist. This is exactly how modern raptors carry heavy prey. They don't fly straight up. They spiral up on thermals, then glide toward their destination, descending gradually. The biomechanics are plausible, not for full-grown deer, which weigh 150 to 300 pounds. But for young deer, fawns, small children, the mechanics work. 17-foot wingspan provides sufficient lift. Soaring behavior provides efficient energy use. The bird could absolutely have carried prey in the weight range described in some thunderbird accounts. The behavior described in legends matches what we know of large raptors and teratons. Teratornis was likely a predator scavenger similar to modern condors, but larger and more capable of active predation based on skull morphology, showing stronger beak and more forward-facing eyes, suggesting better depth perception. Modern condors are primarily scavengers. Teratornis seems to have been more versatile, capable of scavenging but also capable of killing. The bird would have soared on thermals to conserve energy, hunting by spotting prey from altitude, targeting young, vulnerable or sick animals. Being opportunistic, taking whatever it could manage. These behaviors appear in Native American accounts. Thunderbird doesn't hunt constantly. It appears, takes prey, disappears. This matches soaring predator behavior. Long periods of observation from altitude, brief periods of active hunting or scavenging, then departure. The critical question that determines whether Thunderbird traditions preserve actual observation: did Native Americans encounter living Teratornis, or only fossils? The extinction dates are significant and well established through extensive radiocarbon dating of La Brea specimens and other localities. Teratornis merriami went extinct approximately 12,000 years ago, coinciding with the end of the Pleistocene and the Quaternary extinction event that killed most North American megafauna. Mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, short-faced bears, Teratornis, all gone within a relatively brief period between 13,000 and 10,000 years ago. But 12,000 years ago is recent in human terms. Very recent. This is not deep time. This is yesterday in anthropological terms. Archaeological evidence confirms humans were present in North America by at least 15,000 years ago. Clovis culture appears around 13,000 years ago. Pre-Clovis sites are confirmed in several locations, some dated to 15,000 or 16,000 years ago. Genetic evidence suggests human arrival possibly as early as 20,000 years ago. Humans and Teratornis overlapped. This is not speculation, this is established fact. For at least 3,000 years, probably longer, humans and these giant birds shared the continent. They occupied the same landscapes, They hunted the same prey animals or competed for the same carcasses. Moreover, Teratornis lived in the same ecosystems as the megafauna humans hunted. Mammoths roamed the same valleys where Teratornis soared. Mastodons foraged in the same forests. Giant sloths moved through the same regions. Humans hunted all of these. Clovis points are found in mammoth ribs. Butchery sites show human predation on megafauna. Teratornis scavenged these same animals. Humans and Teratornis would have competed directly for carcasses. They would have encountered each other at kill sites. This is inevitable given overlapping ecological niches. Some anthropologists and historians of science, particularly Adrian Mayer, whose research we've referenced, argue that thunderbird legends preserve actual memory of these birds. The legends aren't pure invention. They're not merely symbolic. They're cultural preservation of real encounters, passed down through hundreds of generations. This is controversial. Most scientists argue that 12,000 years is too long for oral tradition to preserve accurate details. Myth and memory separate over time. Details become corrupted, embellished, transformed. What remains after 500 generations is symbolic and mythological, not observational and historical. But Native American oral traditions have demonstrated remarkable stability over long time periods. Multiple examples exist of oral traditions preserving events for hundreds or thousands of years, with details that archaeological and geological evidence later confirms. The Cowlitz tribe in Washington state has oral traditions about volcanic eruptions affecting Mount Rainier. The traditions describe specific eruption characteristics and landscape changes. Geological evidence confirms a major eruption approximately 2,200 years ago that matches the traditional accounts. The oral tradition preserved accurate details across approximately 80 to 90 generations. The Klamath tribe in Oregon has detailed traditions about the formation of Crater Lake from the collapse of Mount Mazama. The traditions describe a mountain that stood where the lake now exists, describe battles between sky spirits, describe the mountain's destruction, describe the formation of the lake. Geological evidence dates the eruption to approximately 7,700 years ago. The oral tradition preserved accurate details across approximately 300 generations. 300 generations. That's extraordinary retention of factual information through purely oral transmission. Multiple Aboriginal Australian traditions preserve geological events from the end of the Pleistocene. Flooding of coastal areas, changes in sea level, appearance of islands, disappearance of land bridges. These events occurred 10,000 to 13,000 years ago. The traditions preserve them with geographic and sequential accuracy. If oral tradition can preserve 7,700-year-old events, if it can preserve 10,000-year-old geological changes, why not 12,000-year-old observations of very large birds? Especially if those observations were reinforced by continued discovery of fossils. This is the key. This is what makes Thunderbird traditions potentially different from mere myth. Oral tradition plus fossil evidence creates reinforcing loop. Your ancestors tell you about giant birds that carried off deer. You find enormous bird bones eroding from a cliff. The bones validate the stories. The stories explain the bones. The tradition is reinforced across generations. Every few generations, someone finds more bones. The physical evidence keeps the tradition alive and accurate. Teratornis fossils are found in surface deposits throughout Western North America. Not rare. Not difficult to find if you know what you're looking at. Natural erosion exposes them constantly. Cave deposits, tar seeps, riverbanks, cliff faces. A hunter in ancient California walking through tar seeps, the same seeps that trapped thousands of animals in the Pleistocene, could easily have found Teratornis wing bones or skull fragments weathering out. These would be recognizably bird bones, but impossibly large, larger than any living bird. This physical evidence would validate legends about giant birds. The combination of living memory of encounters plus continued discovery of fossils across thousands of years could preserve Thunderbird traditions with accuracy for the entire post-extinction period. 12,000 years becomes survivable for oral tradition if the tradition is continuously reinforced by physical evidence. Adrienne Mayer's research, published in her 2005 book Fossil Legends of the First Americans, showed that Native American traditions often correlate with specific fossil beds. She mapped tribal traditions against paleontological survey data. The correlation is statistically significant. Tribes living near rich fossil deposits have more elaborate traditions about giant animals. The elaboration increases with fossil availability. This suggests that traditions aren't purely transmitted from distant sources. They're developed and reinforced by local fossil discoveries. Thunderbird legends are strongest in regions with accessible Teratornis fossils: Pacific Northwest, Great Plains, southwestern regions, all areas with documented Teratorn remains. The correlation between fossil availability and legend elaboration is difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Moreover, some Thunderbird traditions include details that match Teratornis biology in ways that seem unlikely to be purely invented. Some accounts describe Thunderbird nests on cliffs containing huge eggs. Teratornis likely nested on cliff faces like modern condors based on morphology and ecological reconstruction. The eggs would have been proportionally large, potentially 6 to 8 inches long based on body size scaling, larger than any modern bird egg except ostrich. Ancient peoples finding fossil nests with eggs would have direct evidence supporting giant bird traditions. Some traditions describe Thunderbird eating carrion as well as hunting. Teratornis was probably a facultative scavenger like modern condors, capable of active predation but also feeding on carcasses. This mixed feeding strategy appears in indigenous accounts. The bird doesn't only hunt, it also scavenges. This is accurate behavioral description if based on observation. Some traditions specify that Thunderbird appears in mountainous regions and along coasts. Teratornis fossils are concentrated in areas that were mountainous or coastal during the Pleistocene based on paleo-environmental reconstruction. The geographic specificity matches actual fossil and paleo-environmental distributions. Some traditions associate Thunderbird with specific landmarks, certain mountains, certain valleys, certain caves. In several cases, these landmarks are near known fossil localities. The association between sacred Thunderbird sites and actual fossil deposits is documented in multiple cases. This suggests that fossil discoveries created sacred associations that persisted in tradition. The Thunderbird was real. Whether described from living birds observed before extinction, from fossils discovered continuously after extinction, or from both observation and fossils, Native American peoples were documenting genuine animals, birds with wingspans of 12 to 17 feet, birds capable of carrying substantial prey in flight, birds associated with storms because they soared on weather fronts and appeared during turbulent weather conditions when updrafts aided their flight. Birds that were dangerous to humans because a bird with 8-foot-long talons approaching humans is terrifying and potentially lethal. Every major detail finds support in paleontology. The wingspan was enormous, confirmed by fossils. Complete wings have been preserved, allowing precise measurement. The birds could carry substantial prey, biomechanically plausible based on wing area, body weight, and soaring behavior. They were associated with specific geographic regions. Fossil distribution matches legend distribution. They appeared during storms. Soaring behavior on weather fronts explains this. Large birds ride storm fronts to gain altitude efficiently. Ancient peoples observing this would associate the birds with storms causally. The exaggerations were understandable mythological amplification. Blocks the sun is dramatic description of very large shadow. Creates thunder is association between wing noise and actual thunder during storms. Eyes flash. Lightning is mythological addition explaining storm connection. These are normal processes of oral tradition development. Real observations get amplified and elaborated, but never entirely disconnect from physical foundation. For 12,000 years, rational people who encountered these traditions understood the thunderbird as legend, as metaphor, as symbol of natural forces. For 200 years, Western scientists insisted such large flying birds were impossible. Maximum wingspan was assumed to be around 10 feet. Anything larger couldn't achieve powered flight under Earth's gravity. The physics prohibited it. Then we found the bones. We measured the wingspans. 12 feet, 15 feet, 17 feet. We calculated the biomechanics. We determined flight was possible using soaring behavior. We mapped the fossil distribution. We realized it matched the legend distribution. And we understood that indigenous peoples had been describing real animals all along. They said thunderbird. We say Terratornis. We're describing the same wings, the same shadow, the same enormous birds that flew over North America until humans arrived and the climate changed and the megafauna died and the giant birds disappeared into legend, preserved accurately by peoples who understood that some truths are worth repeating for 1,000 generations until someone finally finds the bones that prove the stories were right. Chapter 5. The Rock, the bird that carried elephants. The Arabian Nights, that collection of Middle Eastern and South Asian stories compiled over centuries, contains a tale about Sinbad the sailor encountering the rock. The story appears in multiple versions. The details vary, but the core description remains consistent. We saw in the distance something magnificent in size and towering in height. As it drew near, I could see it was a bird of enormous bulk. Its wings, when spread, cast a shadow over the ship like a cloud. I had heard of the rock from travelers, that it dwells on islands in the eastern seas, and that it feeds its young on elephants. It is so strong it can seize an elephant in its talons, carry it to a great height, then let it fall, so it is killed, whereupon the bird descends and devours it. This is not presented as fantasy in the original context. It's presented as travel report. Strange, but real. Sinbad is unreliable narrator in many ways, prone to exaggeration and dramatic storytelling. But the rock is described as something real, something known, something travelers report consistently from distant islands. Marco Polo, returning from Madagascar around 1295 AD, reports something remarkably similar. His account is independent from Arabian Nights, though he may have heard of rock legends during his travels. But he claims direct investigation of the reports. The people of the island report that at certain seasons of the year, an enormous bird makes its appearance, called a roke. It is so strong that it can seize an elephant in its talons and carry it to a great height, then let it fall so that it is killed by the fall, whereupon the bird descends and devours it. Those who have seen it say, it is extremely large and powerful. The bird is not seen at all seasons, but only at certain times. Then Polo adds critical detail that transforms this from vague legend to claimed physical evidence. He describes an investigation commissioned by Kublai Khan, the Mongol emperor he served. The Grand Khan, hearing these accounts, sent emissaries to the island to investigate the reports and bring back information about this marvelous bird. They were gone for several months. They returned with extraordinary evidence. They brought back a feather from the rook. And then Polo makes a personal claim. I saw this feather myself. It was brought to the Khan's court. I examined it directly. The quill was as thick as a sheep's leg. The feather measured 90 spans in length. This is extraordinary specificity, not vague legend from distant sources. Personal testimony. claimed direct observation of physical evidence, specific measurements, thickness as thick as a sheep's leg, length 90 spans, which would be approximately 135 to 150 feet depending on span definition. Obviously impossible for a bird feather, but the claim is specific. Someone showed Marco Polo something they identified as a rock feather, and he believed them, or at least reports it. The rock legends are consistently associated with Madagascar and islands in the Indian Ocean. Specific geographic attribution, not universal, not everywhere. Madagascar primarily, Zanzibar, islands off East African coast, the Comoros. The geographic specificity is notable. Someone identified particular locations as rock habitat. The creature is always described as enormous. Always. Never moderate. Never merely large. Enormous. Beyond ordinary conception. Always associated with elephants. This is consistent across sources. The rock preys on elephants specifically. Not generic large prey. Elephants. Always found in remote island locations. Islands. Not mainland, not accessible regions. Remote islands requiring sea voyages to reach. 1658. French explorer Étienne de Flacourt, governor of French Madagascar from 1648 to 1655, publishes Histoire de la Grande Île Madagascar. Flacourt is serious administrator and naturalist, attempting systematic documentation of Madagascar's natural history, geography, and peoples. He includes accounts from Malagasy people describing a bird called Vuoron Patra. The Malagasy informants describe an enormous bird living in remote southern regions of the island. Very large. Larger than any known bird. Living in inaccessible regions, dangerous to approach. The bird eats tree fruits. It nests on the ground. Its eggs are enormous. The descriptions are consistent across multiple informants from different regions. Flacourt doesn't see the bird himself. He's honest about this. These are second-hand reports from indigenous sources, but he records them systematically as natural history. He's attempting to document what exists, separating reliable reports from obvious exaggeration. His tone is cautious, but he clearly believes his informants are describing something real. He notes the Malagasy insist this bird exists currently. Not ancient legend, not mythological past. Current existence. It lives in the southern forests, in the most remote and difficult terrain. People have seen it. People have found its tracks. People have found its eggs. The insistence on current existence is important. This isn't ancestor story. This is contemporary natural history, 1830s through 1850s. European naturalists begin systematic exploration of Madagascar following French colonization. They're searching for botanical specimens, minerals, geographic data. Instead, they find something extraordinary. Not living rocks, but bones, enormous bird bones, leg bones thick as human torsos, eggshells the size of beach balls, fragments and complete specimens of the largest bird, by weight, ever to exist. The bird is initially named Aepyornis maximus by French naturalist Isidore Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire in 1851, based on bone and egg fragments sent from Madagascar. The name means highest bird or tall bird, commonly called the elephant bird. Not because it carried elephants, it couldn't fly at all, but because it was elephant-sized, because it was the ecological equivalent of elephants on an island lacking large mammals. The measurements are staggering even by paleontological standards where large sizes are common, height up to 10 feet tall when standing erect based on complete skeletal reconstructions. Weight estimated 730 to 1,000 pounds based on bone dimensions, comparative anatomy, and scaling relationships. Some estimates push toward 1,100 pounds. For comparison, an adult male ostrich, the largest living bird, weighs about 280 pounds and stands 8 feet tall. Aepyornis was 3 to 4 times heavier. substantially bulkier, built like massive ostrich but heavier boned and more robust. Eggs. The eggs are what make Epyornis unforgettable. Up to 13 inches long, circumference up to 30 inches, capacity approximately 2 gallons. That's equivalent to 160 chicken eggs. 7 ostrich eggs. The largest eggs of any known bird species, living or extinct. Complete eggs are found in sand dunes in southern Madagascar. They're sold in markets. They're used as containers. They're so large and durable that even partial eggshells are impressive specimens. Epyornis was the heaviest bird by weight ever to exist. Larger flying birds existed in terms of wingspan. Argentavis magnificens from Argentina had 23-foot wingspan. Pelagornis sandersi had 24-foot wingspan, but both were much lighter than Epyornis. Built for flight. Hollow bones. Lightweight. Epyornis was built for mass. Solid bones. Heavy, powerful legs. 3-toed feet like ostrich, but much larger. It was the heaviest bird. The most massive. The closest thing to elephant-sized bird that evolution ever produced. Critically, fundamentally, it was completely flightless. Vestigial wings, tiny, useless. No flight feathers. No adaptation for flight whatsoever. No capacity for powered flight. It was as flightless as a penguin. More flightless. At least penguins use their wings for swimming. Epyornis wings were truly vestigial. Evolutionary remnants. The bird walked. It ran. It didn't fly at all. So how does a completely flightless bird explain flying rock legends? How does a bird that cannot fly explain stories of birds carrying elephants through the air? The answer is complex, involving multiple strands of evidence, misunderstanding, deliberate deception possibly, and conflation of different things. First strand. The bird's sheer size created legends. Imagine finding an egg the size of a beach ball. Imagine finding bones indicating a bird weighing half a ton. Imagine oral traditions about birds larger than any living creature. These accounts would spread through trade routes from Madagascar to Arabia to India to China. Details would become garbled through translation and transmission through multiple languages and cultures. Perhaps the birds could fly in ancient times. Perhaps they still fly somewhere in unexplored regions of the island. Perhaps they're rare and only appear seasonally. Second strand. Possible misidentification or conflation with large raptors from mainland Africa. Madagascar has no large raptors native to the island. The largest native raptor is the Madagascar fish eagle with 5-foot wingspan. Nothing impressive by continental standards, but nearby mainland Africa has substantial species. Martial eagles with 8-foot wingspan, African crowned eagles capable of taking prey up to 66 pounds, lappet-faced vultures with 9-foot wingspan. To observers unfamiliar with large raptors, to island peoples who don't have such birds locally, seeing these mainland species during occasional visits to the African coast could create exaggerated accounts upon return. Stories from African mainland could blend with Malagasy Epyornis accounts, creating composite legendary bird. Third strand. The feather Marco Polo describes. Quill as thick as a sheep's leg. Feather 90 spans long. This is far too large for any bird feather. Even Epyornis, massive as it was, didn't have feathers remotely that large. Flightless birds don't have large flight feathers. They have hair-like feathers, primitive feathers, but not the elaborate pennaceous feathers of flying birds. A sheep's leg is 6 to 8 inches in diameter. A feather with quill that thick is impossible for any known bird, but Madagascar has raffia palms, Raffia farinifera. These are massive palms with fronds up to 80 feet long, among the longest leaves of any plant on Earth. Individual frond segments can be 6 to 8 feet long, several inches wide, with a thick central rib that could easily be mistaken for a quill. To someone unfamiliar with palm morphology, to someone expecting to see a giant bird feather, a raffia palm frond could look exactly like what they expect. Long, rigid, central rib like a quill, lateral veins like feather barbs. Contemporary analysis suggests Marco Polo's informants in Madagascar showed him raffia palm fronds, claiming they were rock feathers. Whether this was deliberate deception, motivated by trade advantages, if Polo believed Madagascar harbored marvel creatures, honest mistake by people who genuinely believed these were bird feathers, or elaborate joke, is unknown. Medieval people had senses of humor. Tricking foreign travelers wasn't unknown, but someone showed Polo something he believed was a feather from an impossible bird, and he reported it as fact, or at least as claimed fact, without adding excessive skepticism. Fourth strand, probably the most significant. The elephant connection. Why are rock legends specifically about birds that hunt elephants? Why elephants rather than generic large prey? Aepyornis fossils and remains are found in regions where elephant birds and dwarf elephants coexisted. Madagascar had endemic elephant species. These elephants underwent insular dwarfism, evolutionary size reduction common on islands where resources are limited. Madagascar's elephants shrunk to approximately 4 feet at shoulder height. Tiny compared to African elephants, but still recognizably elephants. Trunk, tusks, elephant morphology. These pygmy elephants went extinct around the same time as Aepyornis, probably between 1000 and 1500 AD, possibly slightly later. Humans hunted both. Butchery sites contain both Aepyornis and elephant remains. People killed them, ate them, used their bones. Ancient peoples finding both Aepyornis bones and dwarf elephant bones in the same regions would create associations. The largest bird and elephants from the same location. Both enormous by island standards. Both extinct or nearly extinct by time of regular foreign contact. Stories linking them would emerge naturally. The rock hunts elephants is logical inference if you find both species remains together, even though the ecological reality was completely different. Neither hunted the other, but they shared landscapes. They died in the same places. Their bones appear together. The association forms. Moreover, consider how stories develop through trading contacts. Arabian traders visiting Madagascar might have seen dwarf elephant bones. 4 feet at shoulder. These are small elephants by mainland African standards. But they're elephants. Tusks prove it. If you're trading in elephant ivory from Madagascar, if locals tell you about giant birds, if you see both bird bones and elephant bones, the synthesis is natural. The giant birds hunt the elephants. This explains why both species remains are found together. This creates trading story. Madagascar has marvel creatures, giant birds that hunt elephants. This makes Madagascar exotic, makes trade with Madagascar prestigious. The story serves commercial purposes. The extinction timeline is critical for understanding how rock legends developed. Aepyornis survived until approximately 1000 AD, based on radiocarbon dating of eggshell and bone specimens. Some controversial evidence suggests survival until 1200 or even 1500 AD, though this is debated. Human settlement of Madagascar occurred around 500 AD, based on archaeological evidence. That's approximately 1500 years ago, very recent in human terms. Humans and elephant birds overlapped for 500 to 700 years minimum, possibly up to 1,000 years. This is within historical memory. This is recent enough that oral tradition could preserve accurate information across the gap. The birds were hunted by human settlers. This is proven by archaeological evidence. Butchery marks on Aepyornis bones. Eggshells found in human habitation sites used as containers. Concentrated bone deposits near villages suggesting systematic hunting. Human predation contributed significantly to extinction. We killed them. We ate them. We collected their eggs. We destroyed their habitat through fire agriculture. Within centuries of human arrival, Aepyornis was gone. This means living Malagasy people have cultural memory of elephant birds within historical time, possibly within family memory of living elders by time Europeans arrived. The Vuron Patra stories Flacour recorded in 1658 aren't ancient legends from mythological past. They're recent accounts, possibly within 500 years of the bird's extinction, possibly closer. Oral tradition could easily preserve details across that time span. 20 generations, 30 generations, perfectly achievable retention of factual information about animals your great-great-grandparents hunted. Consider what this means. If your great-great-great-great-great-grandparents hunted these birds, if each generation passed down the stories, if you occasionally find enormous bones and eggs reinforcing the tradition, the memory remains vivid, not degraded, not mythologized beyond recognition. Vivid memory of actual birds that actually existed. When Europeans began systematic exploration in the 1600s and 1700s, when Flacour recorded Vuron Patra accounts, the extinction was recent, very recent. The stories weren't ancient myth, they were recent history. People describing birds their ancestors knew. Perhaps describing birds some elderly informants had heard about from their own grandparents. The chain of transmission was short. The degradation was minimal. The rock was real in this sense. The largest bird by weight that humans ever encountered existed in Madagascar. Its remains and eggs inspired legends that grew in the telling. The legends were transmitted through trade routes from Madagascar to Arabia, to India, to Persia, to China. At each step, details were amplified, misunderstood, elaborated. The legends mixed with accounts of large raptors from African mainland. Physical specimens, palm fronds, were misidentified as feathers, creating apparent proof of impossible birds. The stories served commercial purposes, making Madagascar exotic and trade-worthy. The elephant-carrying detail was misunderstanding based on finding both species remains in same locations. Dwarf elephants coexisted with Aepyornis. Both left bones. Stories conflated them. The bird hunts elephants became the narrative, not based on observation of predation, which never occurred, but based on geographic association and trading story development. But the core was true. Giant birds existed on Madagascar. They were larger by weight than any bird in living human memory anywhere in the world. They laid eggs so large they seemed impossible. They lived on islands in the Indian Ocean exactly where legends placed them. They existed until recently, overlapping with human populations, hunted to extinction within historical memory. Everything the legends got right, location, size, eggs, recent existence, was based on real evidence. Actual birds that actually lived. The flight capability was error. Flightless gets misinterpreted or misremembered as flying. The elephant predation was misinterpretation based on geographic association. But the fundamental claim, impossibly large birds lived on Madagascar until recently, was accurate. The extinction of Aepyornis represents tragic pattern of human expansion. When humans reached Madagascar around 500 AD, we found a unique ecosystem evolved in isolation. Island gigantism, giant lemurs, giant tortoises, giant birds. None had evolved defenses against human predation. They'd never encountered persistence hunters. They'd never encountered fire. They'd never encountered habitat destruction through agriculture. We arrived, we hunted them. We collected their eggs, preventing reproduction. We introduced rats and other invasive species that ate remaining eggs. We burned forest for agriculture, destroying habitat. Within a few centuries, Aepyornis was gone, along with most other megafauna. Giant lemurs extinct, giant tortoises extinct, dwarf elephants extinct, dwarf hippos extinct. all within 500 to 1,000 years of human arrival. The rock survived only in legend, but the legend preserved truth, filtered through layers of elaboration and misunderstanding, but never entirely disconnected from reality. The birds were real, the eggs were real, the impossible size was real. We killed them. Then we told stories about them. Then Europeans arrived and collected the stories. Then scientists arrived and found the bones and realized the stories had foundation in fact. Just not about flying, not about carrying elephants, but about impossibly large birds on Madagascar, about eggs that could hold 2 gallons, about creatures that once existed and are now extinct because we killed them. French naturalists in the 1850s found the bones and realized legends had validity. The rock, stripped of flying and elephant carrying, was Aepyornis, 10 feet tall, half a ton in weight, eggs the size of beach balls, found exactly where Arabian and Malagasy legends placed it. The rock was real. We just arrived too late to see it alive. By time systematic European exploration began, Aepyornis was extinct or nearly extinct. By time scientists began searching, only bones remained, but the bones proved the legends preserved truth. Impossibly large birds had lived on Madagascar, had laid impossibly large eggs, had been hunted by humans within historical memory. The feather Marco Polo examined was Raphia palm frond. The elephant connection was geographic association misinterpreted as predation. The flying capability was error or elaboration. But underneath the errors, reality remained. Giant birds were real. The legend preserved observation, distorted but not destroyed by transmission across cultures and centuries. We began with a skull in a museum, Protoceratops andrewsi, catalogue number A, MNH 5027, a fossil that solved a mystery 2,500 years old. We've journeyed through 5 creatures, 5 impossibilities, 5 myths that science proved real, dragons whose bones were found exactly where ancient texts said they would be, dinosaur fossils distributed precisely where dragon legends appeared, Protoceratops in the Gobi where Greeks described griffins, Chinese Longu collection sites aligning perfectly with major fossil beds. The correlation was too precise to dismiss as coincidence. Unicorns whose skulls showed single massive horn sockets on the forehead. Elasmotherium sibiricum, the Siberian unicorn, weighing 5 tons, surviving until 29,000 years ago. DNA evidence proving overlap with human populations for at least 20,000 years, leaving fossils across Eurasia exactly where unicorn legends were strongest. The match was too specific to be accidental. Behemoth, whose description in Job matched sauropod anatomy, tail like cedar, bones like brass and iron. The oldest potential dinosaur description in literature, preserved in scripture, waiting 3,000 years for paleontology to reveal what the ancients had documented. The precision suggested observation, not invention. Thunderbird, whose wingspan was confirmed by fossils. Teratornis merriami at 12 feet, Iolornis incredibilis at 17 feet. Native American descriptions validated by paleontology. The birds existed. The legends were accurate. The geographic correlation between fossils and traditions was undeniable. Rock whose size was proven by Aepyornis maximus bones, 10 feet tall, 1,000 pounds, eggs holding 2 gallons. The largest bird by weight ever to exist, found exactly where Arabian and Malagasy legends placed it, hunted to extinction within historical memory. The impossible bird was real, just flightless, just recently extinct. 5 times we were wrong to dismiss mythology as pure fiction. 5 times physical evidence proved ancient peoples were observing accurately. 5 times the impossible became merely extinct or merely rare or merely misunderstood. What have we learned? The ancients were not primitive. They were observers. They found fossils and tried to explain them. They encountered rare animals and tried to classify them. They described what they saw using available vocabulary. When they lacked words for extinct Pleistocene megafauna, they created new words: dragon, unicorn, thunderbird, rock. They were doing natural history, paleontology before the scientific method, zoology before Linnean taxonomy. Their conclusions were often wrong taxonomically. They thought fossils represented living animals hiding in unexplored regions. They added magical elements based on misunderstood phenomena. They conflated multiple species. But their observations were frequently accurate. This matters because it challenges assumptions about knowledge across time. We tend to believe that ancient peoples were credulous, easily fooled, prone to fantasy, that their myths were disconnected from reality, that dragons and unicorns were pure imagination, that Native American legends were purely symbolic. The evidence reveals otherwise. Myths preserve observation. Legends contain truth. The fantastic has foundations in fact, distorted by limited knowledge and artistic elaboration, but never entirely fictional. When every culture independently describes dragons, they're all describing dinosaur fossils. When unicorn legends appear exactly where elasmotherium fossils are found, that's not coincidence. When thunderbird traditions match teratorn distributions, that's evidence. This has methodological implications for how we approach ancient texts and oral traditions. If 5 major mythological creatures turned out to be real, what else might be real? Not cryptozoology. Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster remain unvalidated by physical evidence. Those are different. But what fossil evidence might we be ignoring because it seems to validate mere myth? What ancient accounts might contain accurate descriptions of extinct species we haven't discovered yet? What geographic correlations between mythology and paleontology might we be missing because we assume myths are fiction? The lesson is humility, not about facts. The facts are what they are. Fossils exist. Measurements are precise. Dating is accurate. But about interpretation, we were certain dragons were fantasy. We were certain unicorns were impossible. We were certain Thunderbird was metaphor. We were wrong about all of it. Our current certainties may be equally flawed. What do we believe now that future evidence will overturn? What observations do we dismiss today that tomorrow's science will validate? What traditions do we ignore because they seem too fantastic to investigate? The ancients looked at bones and created stories. We looked at stories and found the bones. The process works bidirectionally. Myth can lead to discovery as much as discovery explains myth. Ancient texts can guide paleontological surveys. Oral traditions can identify fossil localities. The relationship between mythology and science isn't opposition, it's dialogue. The Protoceratops skull sits in its case. Catalogue number AMNH 5027. Children walk past it. Tourists photograph it. Few pause long enough to understand what it represents. It represents the moment when a 2,500-year-old Greek legend was vindicated by paleontology. When Griffin accounts found validation through scientific excavation. When myth became science. When the impossible became real. And it's not alone. Museum catalogues worldwide contain specimens that validate mythology. Elasmotherium skulls in Russian museums proving unicorns were real. Teratornis wings in California proving Thunderbird flew. Aepyornis eggs in Madagascar proving rock existed. All catalogued, all measured. All proving that 5 impossible creatures were actually possible, just extinct. The dragons were real. Not as medieval artists depicted them, not with fire-breathing or magic, but as dinosaur fossils found everywhere humans lived, observed and described within available frameworks. We say dinosaur, they said dragon. Same bones. The unicorns existed, not as Renaissance tapestries show them. not as delicate white horses with spiraling horns, but as Elasmotherium sibericum, 5-ton Ice Age rhinoceros with single massive horn on forehead, exactly where medieval art always placed it. We say Elasmotherium. They said unicorn, same horn. The thunderbird flew, not as pure spirit or weather deity, but as Teratornis, real birds with wingspans up to 17 feet, capable of carrying substantial prey, living alongside humans until 12,000 years ago. We say Teratornis. They said thunderbird, same wings. They gave us myths. We gave them science. Together, we arrive at truth. 5 creatures were real, and somewhere in some museum sits another specimen waiting to validate another myth. Waiting for someone to make the connection. Waiting to prove, once again, that the impossible is merely undiscovered. Until then, remember, when every culture describes dragons, they're describing dinosaur bones. When legends are too consistent, check the fossil record. When the ancients seem obviously wrong, they might be partially right. The skull in Copenhagen, the bones in New York, the eggs in Madagascar, they changed everything. What specimen will be next?